Good morning. Welcome to the Battle of the Asset Classes on this lovely Tuesday morning, first Tuesday in March. We've got a great panel today of some real industry specialists to walk us through their presentations of which asset class that they would like to try to convince you to invest in. So a little housekeeping before we start. First thing is that we'll mute everyone who's not speaking. This will be recorded, so if you don't have a chance to view the entire presentation today, please come back and it'll be listed under the Urban Living Light Festival. We encourage questions, so both during the presentations that the panelists give, as well as for a short period of time thereafter. Please provide any questions that you might have in the Q&A or the chat function within Zoom. And we'll certainly pose those back to the panelists in their presentations. After the presentations, there will be a poll in terms of enabling you to choose and decide which of these presentations and asset classes that you would invest in. So encourage you to do so. We look forward to the results. And also each of the speakers' LinkedIn profiles will also be within the chat functionality. So please feel free to reach out to everyone. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Neal. I manage our international operations for Yardi. We're a global provider of real estate software services and prop technologies on a global basis, and super excited to be here again with all these panelists and industry experts today. We'll jump straight into it. And so today, Philip Camble is going to be able to present our first investment thesis, and he's going to be talking about hotels. So Philip, over to you. Philip, you're on mute. So one of the most common phrases over the past 12 months, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect, thanks.
Brilliant. Let me see if I can get my show on the road here. Okay, if all's good, I'll press on. Good morning, everybody. My name is Philip Camble, and I'm a director of Whitebridge Hospitality. For those of you who don't know us, very quickly, we're a boutique advisory practice. We help people buy, sell, develop, operate tourism-related real estate anywhere in the world, but especially hotels. That's a big chunk of what we do. And my role here today is to present the case for hotels as the better asset class for our pool of investors out there. And I'm going to base my arguments for hotels from the perspective of motivation. What is the motivating a given buyer to invest in real estate? Maybe it's security. Now this guy is your quintessential banker or pension fund manager, and he tends to be old-fashioned, grey, risk-averse. And we have just the hotel product for him. A Premier Inn in central London with Whitbread covenant and sharp yields of less than, say, 4%. Maybe you're in search of higher yields than the dull banker. So we have the product for you. How about a mid-market hotel in a secondary city, for which yields will be much higher, say around 8%, for that innovative, creative, and more hands-on investor like Peter here. But maybe you're even more hands-on than even Peter. Maybe you're a developer looking across the real estate spectrum, and in order to get a wider scheme approved by planners or backers, the inclusion of a hotel could be the key to unlocking your mixed-use project. This is perhaps an extreme example of mixed use, but I thought it looks good, it looks sexy, and it makes the point well. This is the Mall of the Emirates in Dubai, which incorporates extensive retail, an indoor ski slope in the desert, and a 5-star Kempinski hotel. Or maybe lifestyle is the motivating force. You might be a quiet chap looking for the good life and having a passion to please people and work in hospitality in the most hands-on manner possible, a bit like Raymond here. In which case, we have just the assets for you. There are plenty of small, handy-sized hotels around the UK or Europe that could suit you, sir. Or maybe geography is important to you. It was for this enterprising young chap. He would surely never have bought his first hotel anywhere else than in Scotland. Many small hotels are bought by local folk to enhance their businesses and their reputations in their communities. But if kudos is your motivator, we also have assets for you. This chap bought the Ritz Paris a few years back, and he still owns it, despite selling off many other prestigious real estate assets. So he clearly sees more kudos in owning a hotel than any other real estate asset class. All that said, the question of liquidity should be front of mind for any investor. And as this chart shows, hotels are liquid across the UK and Europe. Lots of deals are done annually, even in 2020, one of the worst years on record, there were deals done. And with such variety of hotels available, there'll always be investors for the different types. If risk spreading is your thing and portfolios are what you're looking for, again, we have you covered. There are many hotels held in portfolios, and they can be acquired as portfolios. And as consolidation takes off again, no doubt in the future, portfolios will be available again. Finally, if a deal is your motivation, the next few months may well see a few sale items come to market. The timing in the yellow sign may well be about right, but certainly over the next year or so, even these guys will be attracted to the sweet aroma of hotels, of the hotel sector. In conclusion, therefore, hotels are best. They offer every kind of risk level, scale, locational attributes that any given investor could be seeking. And my competitors may try to sell you some alternative asset classes, but let's face it, would you rather talk to your dinner date about a student complex in Durham or an apartment block in Birmingham? Or would you rather chat about that luscious resort you just bought somewhere sexy? Or if you prefer something closer to home, how about something on the Costa Smeralda? But if your thing is more akin to the dull banker at the start of my pitch, then of course we have that too. So many thanks. Remember, hotels are best. And now back to Neal, I guess.
Philip, thanks so much. The hotel in Bali certainly does look appealing. Let me ask maybe a question that I think many in the audience are dying to ask, and that would be, is the effect of COVID, has that permanently changed the landscape of a particular hotel sector more so than another? And given all of the different types of hotels that you've shown in terms of from a investment point of view, which one would you not invest in so readily?
In the short term or long term?
I guess maybe to both.
So the ones that have been most affected have been those in big cities and those around airports. So we asset manage a few hotels around the UK, and they're the ones that have been most affected. We've got a big one at Heathrow, which has been closed since April, and we still don't know when it will reopen because Heathrow Airport have closed Terminal 4 and they haven't said when it will reopen.
Mm.
So they're the worst affected. Short term, I wouldn't invest at Heathrow Airport. Where would I invest? I'd probably invest in a smaller hotel, regional sort of tourist location, because staycations are probably here to stay for a little while longer. I think the international travel will pick up this year, but I think it's going to be a few years before it returns to normal. And I think because here in the UK we are vaccinating so quickly, the exit from lockdowns will be a lot quicker. So if I'm looking at pan-European, I would probably invest somewhere regional UK in a good tourist location, short term.
Great.
Long term, I would go back to places like London, gateway cities, because they will recover. I think COVID-19 is a temporary blip.
Great. Some strong words of advice. Thanks very much for that. All right, so presenter number 2, Harry Douglas is going to be presenting about hybrid accommodation and also explaining what that is. Harry, over to you.
Let's just do this. Just 1 second. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to present the investment case for hybrid hotels. And I'm from HVS Consultancy based in London, and we're partnering up with HVS Hodges Ward Elliott, the sell-side brokerage. A quick run through of what I'm going to cover in the next 5 minutes. Firstly, I'm going to tell you all what, at least I think, the definition of a hybrid hotel is. Then I'm going to briefly run through the typical guest profile. Who are the guests visiting these hotels? Where are they from? What do they do? Then I'm going to cover off the underlying trends which support across the MEA and the world, and then summarize with my perspective on the investment opportunity to hopefully persuade you to part with your cash. So what is a hybrid hotel? Essentially, it's all things to all people. This is a typical room in a mining hostel, actually. And what we have here is twin beds, which can be put together as a double bed. So it can fit 1, 2, 3, or even 4. And behind that, you see a bunk bed, which is divided from the main area by a bookshelf or a storage area. So in here, we've got effectively 4 bed spaces, but that's not to say that the room isn't suitable for just a twin or even one person. So it's a very, very flexible product. Who stays in hybrid hotels? Well, we have the full range of guests staying in these places. Transient leisure, budget-conscious corporate, students, of which there are many and growing, the youth travellers in the backpacker market, upwardly mobile, cost-conscious travellers, who many anticipate being the first to recover post-COVID. Schools groups, highly organised, highly efficient, very prevalent groups across Europe. Young professionals and digital nomads. It was only yesterday, I think, that Spotify said that they'll be paying their employees the same rates as San Francisco and New York, despite the fact that they might not be working in either of those 2 cities. The weekend breakers, who are support bubble of many tourist locations, and then families. So it's a very flexible product, and it does create a wonderful vibe. What are the key underlying trends supporting the development of hybrid hotels? Well, what we've experienced, ignoring our COVID slump, is a rapid expansion of international tourist arrivals across the world and in Europe. And except for 2008, 2009, and more recently, the COVID, there's been amazing near double-digit percentage increases in the number of tourist arrivals year on year. And once we move out of this low, I think that trend will continue, because essentially the population of the world is increasing. And importantly, within that trend are an increase in global international youth trips and therefore global youth travel expenditure. The main segment for a hybrid hostel or hybrid hotel, because of the nature of the accommodation. Not everyone wants to share accommodation, but many, many people do. So what is the investment opportunity exactly? What we have, in my view, is a large white space still, which crosses a number of different asset classes. And what we have here pictured in yellow is the space that I think is yet to be filled sufficiently. And what it does is cross over a number of different concepts, including conventional hostels with just dorms, hybrid hostels with mainly rooms, but with some dorms, even some of the design-led budget hotel accommodation with typically private rooms, and even amongst the co-living and other asset classes which are converging. So this really is the best thing to cover off all those different spheres. And why? Why is it important? Well, in my view, it generates a higher revenue per square meter. And essentially, this table shows you that for the same property in the same location, covering the same amount of development space, the GFA here of 6,000 square meters, what we actually produce through a hybrid hotel is an additional 10.5% increase in GOP per square meter against a conventional four-star hotel in the same location. And that is principally due to the higher rooms revenue per square meter and the lower departmental costs of the rooms. And with a lower cost base, it translates to higher profitability. So essentially, these are the main plus points. A mix of private and multi-bedded hotel and conventional hostel rooms responds to local demand. Nature of accommodation is appealing to hotel guests with the highest growth and travel mobility prospects. Rooms revenue reduces exposure to more volatile F&B. The lean business operation produces highest profit per square meter. And with the low development costs, this produces the highest investment returns. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Harry. Remember, audience, please submit any questions that you'd like to have answered. Harry, in the meantime, I've got a question. Is there one brand that stands out in this sector today? So you mentioned there's a number of different parallels in terms of overlapping sectors, whether it's PBSA, whether it's your traditional youth hostels like Clink and YHA, et cetera, or other hotels. But is there one brand that really stands out that one would invest in today?
Well, I would just say there aren't a lot of brands that give many people a lot of certainty in the middle of a pandemic when we're all forced to socially distance. But I don't think it's really changed from generator and mininger right now. Yeah.
And do you see some of the leading brands or hoteliers in terms of also entering the space as a larger segment to complement their other brands and assets?
Yes, we fully anticipate that there's a real opportunity here for branding of a product which not only covers hostel accommodation, conventional hotel accommodation, but also to a degree co-living and PBSA. I'm sure our other speakers will talk about that convergence and how existing planning permissions have allowed PBSA, for example, to have, or co-living to have developed from former PBSA planning permissions. So I think with the requirement for private space and socially distanced areas, there will be a movement towards further brand development and concept development as well. Great.
Excellent. Hey, thanks so much. Speaking of co-living, Jo Winchester now from CBRE is going to present her argument for investing in co-living. Jo, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. So I'm going to speak for a few minutes about co-living. So firstly, what is co-living? Co-living is a new real estate typology which is designed to meet the needs of the modern single-person household, which is a market segment which has not been well catered to until now. Similar to other modern bed sector developments, co-living consists of small private units, usually studios, and large communal spaces for the use of residents, which together make up the whole living environment. Operational models vary, but there is often a social dimension to a co-living scheme, with operators hosting a programme of activities designed to get residents mixing. Leasing models are slightly more flexible than regular build to rent, with less paperwork and some operators offering a choice of tenancy lengths. So, why invest in co-living? I'm going to suggest 4 reasons. First of all, there is a solid demand case from single-person households. Co-living is underpinned by some massive mega trends. The lack of affordability to buy, stringent mortgage criteria, the need for a huge deposit, and people marrying and having children later mean that people are renting for longer. There is a very established long-term trend of people moving to cities to work and live. And finally, there is a massive mental health and loneliness agenda right now. Loneliness is on the rise, and co-living is helping to meet this need. By offering a different unit type at a different price point from build to rent, co-living is more tailored to the needs of people who, for whatever reason, are living by themselves. Although the highest number of renters in the population are drawn from the 25 to 44 age group, co-living is not age constrained and could potentially meet the needs of anyone with a requirement for a single unit of accommodation. The second reason to invest is early mover advantage. A good reason to look at this sector right now is early mover advantage. We are beginning to see the same cycle that we saw in the investment of student accommodation after the financial crisis. We are seeing good interest from private equity and private investors for the available opportunities, who have spotted the robust demand case and see the potential to buy in advantageously now and benefit from yield compression in the future as the market matures and assets stabilise. The third compelling reason to invest is asset management. The third reason why investors are looking at co-living is that it could be an ideal asset management solution for slightly difficult sites. Although the treatment of co-living is far from consistent in planning terms, there is an emerging pattern in what is getting approval. Placemaking and the regeneration of sites which have lain fallow for a long time have been aspects which have won the approval of planning officers. Bringing heritage assets back into use has been another consistent theme, and co-living can be built with no or minimal parking. Otherwise, unlettable office buildings can be brought back into use by converting them to co-living via permitted development rights. We also often see co-living schemes being built on slightly difficult sites on the edge of good residential areas and also as part of mixed-use schemes. And the fourth and final reason I want to suggest to look at the co-living sector seriously is that co-living satisfies numerous ESG criteria. With the G7 summit coming up, and with so much talk of ESG and sustainable investment right now, it's important to point out that co-living goes way beyond a debate about obsolescence, EPCs, and whether a building will become unlettable, which is where a lot of the mainstream sectors are stuck. The only dedicated co-living fund in the market, the DTZ Investment Management Co-Live Fund, has attracted investment from local authority pension funds drawn not only by the strong returns from co-living, but also by the robust ESG features. From an environmental perspective, co-living can be built to very high energy efficiency standards. It also lends itself to modular construction, which reduces waste on site. And in general, the concept promotes non-car transport. The millennial target age group is also sympathetic to environmental issues. Co-living can also have a positive social impact. Those who develop, invest and operate cohesively can do this really well. Social impacts can be woven into good design, from an investment perspective, discounted market rents or affordable housing contributions can contribute to creating mixed communities and also benefit the wider community, for example, by providing a co-working space or a cafe. And from an operational perspective, operators can cater to the well-being of residents. There is also a link between mental health and employment, which in the long run will benefit the scheme from an investment perspective. So to wrap up, co-living is a new real estate typology with a robust demand pool. It is designed to meet the needs of today's single-person households, a cohort which is not currently well provided for at all. At this stage in the market evolution, there is the opportunity to gain early mover advantage and benefit as the market matures. And co-living is a great solution for difficult sites and has very strong ESG credentials, which are appealing to both planners and investors. Neal.
Great, thank you for that, Jo. A question from the audience is, how has COVID affected co-living from your experience with social distancing?
In my experience, I think actually it has responded extremely well. And the reason for that is that the individual units lend themselves very well to social distancing and self-isolating where necessary. You have your own private space. You don't have to share bathroom or kitchen facilities with other people. So from a hygiene perspective, it's very, very clean. And the social spaces obviously would have to be used in a socially distanced way, but then show me any public space that isn't being managed like that at the moment. It's only, you know, as much as your local gym or any other facility for that matter. Yeah. But I think that actually there is evidence that co-living is actually overcoming a lot of the difficulties of other types of rental accommodation, like house shares, for example, where you would have to share facilities.
Question from my side is that I often think of co-living as smaller properties and heavily curated in terms of almost like a membership model, in terms of alignment, in terms of individuals who live in a co-living space. Is co-living a larger platform though, in terms of how many units would you describe generally would be in a co-living platform from an institutional investment perspective?
Well, from an investment perspective, most are looking for scale. There are not that many examples at the moment, but there have been some that have gained planning. So, I mean, I see them from anything from 50 to 100 beds at boutique scale. And there are proposals coming through at sort of 400 to 700 beds. So at every point in the scale at this time.
Great. Okay. Thanks very much for that. There's a few other questions. We'll get back to those later. But now over to Honor Barratt, speaking about retirement living and the investment thesis in terms of retirement living. Honor, over to you.
Thank you, Neal. So I don't have any slides to share this morning. So I was supposed to write them last night. But at 7:30 last night, I was driving around the streets of Sidcup looking for Barry. And Barry is a 78-year-old ex-builder. He moved in with us on Saturday into apartment 17. He pays £940 a week for the benefits of living there. And last night he went for a walk at 5:30. I was conscious that he'd gone. And at 7:30, I thought, shit, I haven't seen Barry. Like, you know, where is he? I'm calling his mobile, I'm driving around the streets, I'm in McDonald's, is he hungry, is he at Morrison's? I just couldn't find him. And I thought, oh my God, I'm gonna have to call his daughter and say, I've lost your dad. And then he just called in to reception and he said, oh, I got on the bus and I went to Welling and I've had some fish and chips and now I can't work out how to get home. I was like, oh, bloody hell, Barry. And I thought, I'm telling you that not to excuse the fact that I don't have any good looking slides, but to share that retirement living is really a needs-based business. This is not a discretionary spend. It's not a nice to have. It's not something you can particularly put off. It's very needs-based, and how lovely to run a business that people need to have you. So I haven't got any slides. So I drove home last night about 10 o'clock, having picked up Barry from Welling and taken them back to apartment 17. And I thought, okay, what would I do if I had 100 million quid to invest? And I thought, okay, first off, don't get married, because that's a very quick way to make your 100 million into 50 million. Secondly, I think I would actually put £1 million into Joe's business. I do think that all of us, if we invested 1% of our income into the mental well-being of young people who are our future punters, I think that would be £1 million well spent. So the remaining 99 million quid, I think you should invest into senior housing. And then I thought, okay, so I've got to justify that decision. And I don't need to go through the demographics, because we all know there's like a tsunami of old people coming over the hill. They're pouring in on top of us. There's a shitload of old people out there. And I also don't need to go into their housing wealth, because we all know that our parents live in mortgage-free houses that are way more expensive than we will ever own. You know, they are the Willy Wonka golden ticket guys of this amazing asset that they have. So we don't need to talk about the amount of assets we have. I did think I probably would touch quickly on the audience maybe doesn't know quite how undersupplied this market is. I mean, it's shameful how few of our older people can get into age-appropriate housing. We have a 0.6% of our population over 65 live in senior housing, whereas Neal, you know, where you're from in the US, where you're sitting right now in Amsterdam, they have 6% of their older people living in age-appropriate housing, which means that we've got a ton of building that we can do before we get anywhere close to saturating this market. So we're in a position, we're an asset class that's never going to reach peak supply, and yet we've got enough history behind us that the risk is quite measurable. So I think if you invest your 99 million quid into senior housing, you kind of understand the profile of it. There's so much growth ahead of us, which is why my company, Birchgrove, we can deliver a 20% IRR to our funders, Bridges, all day long, because that's the scale of the task ahead of us. If we wanted to predict our growth, I reckon, who's talking about student? Paddy. I reckon Paddy's going to show us a graph, which is like a hockey stick, and we're out at the bottom of that growth, and it's all growth ahead of us. So we're like investing in Paddy 10 years ago. All that growth is ahead of us. However, unlike Paddy's punters, my punters don't ruin their apartments. So I don't even take a deposit from my punters, because they give me back their apartment in a better state than I gave it to them. They invest in their property. Unlike hotels, my residents stay for 5 years. That's how long their tenure is. They stay forever. Unlike BTR, my punters are spending about £1,200 a week for a 2-bed apartment. It's a lot of money to be old. And unlike in hybrid, my residents are spending on average £160 a month on discretionary food and beverage every month that they're with us. So they just keep on spending with us. As a cat. But I know, Neal, what you're going to say is, okay, so what about the impact of COVID on, I mean, you would have thought that retirement living would be really badly hit, but it's quite the reverse. We've just had the best month we've had since we set the company up in 2016. And I think March will be even February, because of that need that I talked about at the beginning. The pandemic has focused everybody's mind on the need. The children at breaking point, they can't support, you know, the daughters of Barry cannot support Barry any longer, so they've had to outsource that to us. Children all over the country, all over the world, are not able to see their parents and support them, so they have to sort of trust that care to us. So this tsunami of old people that's coming over has just collided with this hopefully once in a lifetime event. And the explosion in the middle is, we need some retirement housing. We need to live in appropriate housing. So I think as much as I'm asking you to give me 99 million quid to invest, it's probably worth pointing out that I'm investing my future retirement fund in old people as well, because they're a bit like crack. Once you work with old people, you never turn back. You can't break the habit. So I will now work in retirement living for the rest of my career. So my pension fund is aligned with your pension fund of 99 million quid, and I think we should invest together. However, I would say you can't shally on this. You can't PowerPoint the hell out of it, because you need to get into this market fast, because the best of us are being snapped up by the likes of BlackRock and Goldman Sachs and yada yada. So you do need to deploy that cash quite quickly. Thank you, Neil. That is my pitch.
So 99 million pounds into senior living, and one goes back to Joe. So which
yes, Joe.
Seems fair so far. Hey, one question for you is, do you own the real estate or do you also own the operations?
Both, yeah, I got both. I think all of us in retirement living probably own both. We're invested for the long term. We can't just sell it and bugger off. You kind of got to stick around and run it. Yeah.
Yep. And does the UK these days also look at retirement living investments in terms of the tenant also owns the property or the unit for a period of time through a earn-out, i.e. through life expectancy, like you have in Australia and some other jurisdictions?
No, we don't. But I think the whole market keeps looking at New Zealand going, why can't we have that model? My model is rental. I don't believe that you should buy. I don't think you should make a big capital investment in your 80s. I think you should rent. But that's very particular to Birchgrove. Okay,
great. Hey, thanks very much. So there you have it. All of us are getting older, so that's another reason to invest in the asset class. Now over to Ben Davis, talking about service departments and extended stay. Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me just get my presentation up. So I'm Ben Davis. I'm co-founder of a business called Saxbury. We are a real estate practice based in London with expertise in full life cycle development advisory and for operator social structuring and deal execution. I'm going to talk you through why I think people should invest in the service department sector. So I'd like to invite you to turn your attention and focus to a sector which supports a whole industry and one that's in the driving seat to stimulate fast redevelopment of declining asset classes. I'll be presenting a case for service departments, a sector which in some circles is described as being nascent, but over the next few minutes, I hope to illustrate why it is being recognised as a defensive asset class by traditionally risk-averse investors. And in many respects, it's a coming of age story. Let me just talk you through where it's been and where it's going. Between 2007 and 2015, the UK service department sector was growing at a steady pace, with legacy operators leading the charge, and rental property demand spiked as buy-to-let investors, residential landlords, were seeking to capitalise on the higher net returns available by leasing whole residential blocks to these operators. And with low market entry barriers, many more operators appeared, and it certainly felt that online travel agencies had provided operators with a license to print money. As corporates began wholesale adoption of professionally managed service departments for extended stays, operators beefed up their nationwide portfolios to meet this escalating demand. Meanwhile, brands such as Rooms, Stay City and Room 2, who operate from purpose-built properties with self-contained home-like facilities, appealed more broadly to corporates and to leisure travellers alike. And this led HVS and Service Department News to describe the sector as the fastest growing asset class in Europe. So you could say that everything was looking peachy until early 2020, when, like most hospitality companies, the service department sector descended into a world of pain. But the sector, it hasn't escaped the negative impacts caused by the pandemic and the resulting restrictions. However, it has demonstrated many resilient characteristics. Hotels have experienced RevPAR declines of between 60 and 80%, and service departments have been roughly half of that. Operators across the country have reported occupancies in the 50s and 70%, whilst still maintaining operating margins of 40 to 50%. This has obviously helped many to remain cash positive. Unsurprisingly, service departments are perfect for those who are self-isolating or in quarantine. And they've also proved to be vital for key workers as traditional hotels. Of course, rates have dropped, but so too have the operating costs. Very simple business model with no conferencing or any large F&B spaces. So once again, service departments are displaying a counter-cyclical tendency, just as they did during the global financial crisis. I'm frequently speaking with commercial landlords who have vacant properties, and many of these landlords are inquiring about how best to future-proof their assets through the redevelopment route. And uniquely, town planners and landlords are now finding themselves on the same side of the table, and service departments are popping up in retail districts. All across the country, department stores are being reimagined by developers. Just like this, the Phoenix department store in Leicester conversion to a 133-bed apartment hotel. So let's just recap on a few of the recent deals just to paint a bit of a picture here. In September last year, APG and the Aussie fund Aware Super acquired a stake in a little-known Dutch service department operator called City ID, and they're now ploughing 500 million euros into the acquisition over the next 4 years. In January this year, the Ireland Strategic Fund took a 13% stake in Stay City, and at the same time, Stay City announced that they signed a new lease for a 100-key apartment hotel in the city in a deal brokered by Saxbury. Room 2 agreed a sale and leaseback with Aberdeen Standard at a sub 5% yield. And we consider this really big news for a small sector because it sends a very clear message that the institutions are recognising that the sector has come of age. Kane International has agreed a £74 million development loan with Canary Wharf Group and Eden to finance the development of a truly monster 279-key lock apart hotel in London. And just this month, Synergy, which is part owned by the Singaporean REIT Ascot, announced a new partnership with London-based firm City Apartments to lease their first apartment hotel in the city. Saxbury brokered this deal during the height of the pandemic, while the capital remained largely empty. So, in summary, with just 4,000 professional managed units in the UK, it's fair to say that this hospitality sector has huge room for growth. Service departments are a defensive asset class, and operators can pivot quite easily between long and short stay business model, augmenting what is already a lean operational model. Operators will sign index-linked FRI leases, making development finance less costly, and also providing secure long-term income for risk-averse pension funds have waded into service departments. Cast iron proof that this sector is worthy of your investment too. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Quick question from the audience is, service departments sound a little bit like co-living, but with a different name, or vice versa. What would you say to that?
I would say what came first.
Okay.
I would say that co-living is a really interesting and investable sector. I would say that it's and to Joe's point, it's where student accommodation was many years ago. Like, you know, it's really at the beginning of the curve. Service departments have existed before co-living, and you know, co-living has a great journey ahead of it. However, service departments are now as an established asset class. I mean, there are, I guess you're not going to find a co-living company out there taking a lease, and if you do, they don't necessarily have the strength of covenant required. These are generally whole investments, opco, propco, development investment, which is great, but this is a very long life cycle. You've got to win over hearts and minds with local councils. You know, does it have affordable housing? You know, is it this, is it that? And actually, to the point about co-living and the similarities with service departments, I mean, frankly, the operation is the similarity. And if in a co-living property one can stay in there for one night, or maybe 100 nights, or 365 nights, well, really, the difference lies in how long the head rests on the bed. But service departments are, for all intents and purposes, they are hotels. They are extended stay hotels, a familiar asset class, but actually one that has greater operational efficiencies and will cater to people that will stay for longer periods.
What's the average length of stay in service departments these days?
Well, service departments is a bit of a catch-all term. It's a bit of an umbrella, right? So under that umbrella, you have apartment hotels and you have corporate housing. And in corporate housing, one can stay there for 30 days. They could stay there for 3 months or a year. In an apartment hotel, they occupy that really great sweet spot where it's maybe, say, 3 to 7 nights, which is longer than one would normally stay in a hotel. But certainly not quite as long as you would stay in a co-living property or a corporate housing unit. So longer stays mean lower operational costs. You don't clean them as much. You also have lower business acquisition costs as well.
Great.
Direct corporates.
Fantastic. Some great insights there. So Ben, you'd also give some of your 100 million to Honor and to Joe just to spread out the wealth a little bit since we're going down that way.
Well, I think retirement living has a great, I mean, you know, you can't argue with an aging population and a tsunami of old people coming our way. We cannot ignore. I also think very much like co-living, being opco propco, it's a very long life cycle to create these products.
Yeah. Great. Okay, now over to build to rent, multifamily, depending on the name and the term you want to give. James, over to you to talk to us about residential and build to rent.
Yeah, hi everyone. Just let me share the screen, which I think is this one. Share that one, and then okay. Where's that? Yeah, is that, yeah, here we go. Can you see that properly?
Yep, it looks good.
Yeah, great. Okay.
And actually, James, sorry, we can see both slides, so I think you may be sharing the wrong screen.
Okay, let me. So you can see. Oh, all right. You're seeing what I. Okay.
Both, yeah.
Let me stop sharing that one and share something else. Yeah, here we go. Let's share that one. How about that? Is that better?
Yep, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Well, yeah, build to rent is something I feel very passionate about. It's I mean, it's in the great scheme of all the things we're talking about this morning. It's something you may feel is well established in the UK, but I think what I'm going to try and do in the next few minutes is just to show how much more scope there still is to come. On the potential for build to rent and what just a simply potentially huge market it is to fill a gap that's been created by a sort of a housing culture within the UK that's become increasingly polarized between owner occupation and sort of conventional affordable housing. And there's been a gap that's really developed in the middle. So if we look at this sort of first slide, this is from the English Housing Survey showing a national picture of the 10-year trends over the last 40 years actually. But you know, rent is the one that's coming up. Private rent is the one that's generally trending upwards, where the other two are either flat or falling. If we look at yes, if we look at the picture in London, this is from the Mayor's data. Again, it's a very similar picture. Ownership is sort of declining. Affordable housing is declining as a percentage, but well, open market rent is still growing. And overall, we've got 4.4 million households in the UK. That's 19% of the total. In London, that rises to 27% of the total households in the capital are renting in the private sector, which is a pretty huge number. If you look at household moves, again, this is a really interesting diagram from the English Housing Survey. It shows the sort of the number of household moves over a one-year period from 19 to 20. Again, it shows that sort of getting on for 5 million homes in the private rented sector. And you'll see that more moves, either as brand new households or moves within a sector, are happening within that that rental sector than either the social rent or the owner occupation, even though the owner occupation is a lot larger. There's a lot more movement in the PRS, but there is, but it is also saddled with sort of reputation of largely negative factors for moving, particularly in terms of poor quality accommodation and negative landlord relationships. And that is something that has been going on a long time. And again, it's part of the culture, and it's part of the reason that people, can often sound, or feel like they're sort of trapped in a rent, because historically it has been an unsatisfactory sector. If you look at the demographic drivers, though, you've got a population that's growing, you've got an urban population that's growing larger than the overall nationwide population, and within that urban population, the household growth is even larger than that because of decline in household sizes, and a particular increase in the number of single people living on their own, or perhaps with sharers. But there is a 10% growth in that aspect. In case anyone isn't aware what build to rent really means, I mean, where we started from a few years ago was looking at the main complaints about the rental sector were the quality of accommodation and the quality of the experience and customer service given by landlords, some of which is appalling, but some of which is very good on an individual level. If you look at some professionally managed sector, that kind of starts to put some minimum standards on those two key principles. And but when we've tried to define build to rent, and successfully so in planning terms, has been you start at that top corner and you say, well, how can we make this both really good quality and a very good experience for residents? And you design the buildings back from there to make them properly managed, integrate the shared amenities, the back of house space, to make it an effective and efficient community to both live in and to manage. I won't go through all of these, but there's a lot of reasons why purpose-built built to rent is a much better option than the sort of potluck of the private rented sector. And one of those really, just to pick out, would be that sort of feeling of security where the resident will feel in control of the decision of when they next move. They don't often, even if they're living in a really good place with a good landlord on an individual basis, there's always that uncertainty as, am I going to be kicked out? Is the landlord going to sell the apartment, or whatever it is? That really doesn't happen in build to rent, and people can genuinely put down roots, form themselves in a community, and be there as long as they wish to. Latest statistics from BPF and others show a total now completion just over 50,000 homes. That's an increase of 23% on last year, and overall, if you take into the schemes under construction and in the planning system, we're looking at about getting on towards 200,000 homes. Again, sounds like a lot, but it's barely scratching the surface. I'll skip over this one a little bit. This is the comparison with London and the regions, and that just shows that actually, although London had the head start on this within the UK, the regions have caught up and are actually at the moment outperforming in terms of the volume of stock coming to market. The rise of build to rent, again, a nice positive looking graph, and it is positive. It is a national picture, and it is destined to continue, because I think when you look at that 50,000 homes that we've got to complete, you think, well, that sounds maybe quite a lot, but that represents just over 1% of all rental homes in the UK. I mean, it's tiny, and even if you look at all the ones that are currently in construction and planning, that takes us up to 180,000. That's not the size of the potential market is this square here, and thanks to Savills for putting this together. But even if you assume that we only get to a third of all rental homes being within sort of purpose-built build to rent, and there's good reason to think that's not an unreasonable number. There's a lot of evidence that buy-to-let landlords of individual properties are exiting the market, but this really shows that we've barely started, and there is so much further to go. and there's a little list of keys to success. And in the current environment, over the last year compared to other asset classes, build-to-rent residents do pay their rent. It's probably higher than any other type of asset class that we've found. Add on to that sort of a post-COVID resilience in terms of that community and the ESG advantages that you get from building a genuine community where people feel like they belong to something as well as having their private space, and a genuine incentive from the developer and investor side to make that a sustainable place. International comparisons are useful. I haven't worked out what this represents in terms of the overall real estate market, but in the US, build-to-rent multifamily housing is now 30% of all institutional real estate investment in the US, which is a pretty stunning figure. So the future is bright. The future is built to rent. Is my message for this audience. This is my favourite case study within the market so far. This is Greenford Quay by Greystar in Ealing in West London. These are CGIs, but the main image there is looking pretty close to that. That main building is now complete. The new bridge over the canal is there. It's 7 rental buildings with some ancillary mixed uses as well, creating a genuine community of over 2,000 homes. And I think not only is that being built to a really high quality, but it's being built really fast through modular construction and in a very sustainable way. So that's probably all I have time to say right now. I could go on forever, but let's leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, James. Yeah, the multifamily build-to-rent market is such a large asset class in North America, and the Greystar, which you just mentioned there as an example, is one of the largest players on a global basis. They manage close to 700,000 residential or multifamily and some student accommodation units. Kind of gives you an idea of the scale of the business. There is one question from the audience, and it pertains to continental Europe. So what is your view on continental Europe? And the comment is, because generally other residential ownership models in terms of housing associations and subsidized housing is such a large portion of residential today in Germany and in the Netherlands, et cetera. What's the role for BTR on the continent?
Well, I think it's similar. I think rental is more within the culture in Europe, in many European places. And Germany, when we started talking about build to rent in the UK, people were talking about places like Germany as a good exemplar. I think it was very different from the US market in many ways, but I think the demographic trends are still there in terms of people, population growing more in cities, and households within that population growth are growing even faster than that because household sizes are less, and that's maybe because people are staying single longer before starting families, or because those family units are not as long lasting as they might have been historically. So I think it's important also to realize that this is not just about young people living in rental and then buying and that's it forever. I think things happen to people in their circumstances, whether it's a change in their employment or their relationship status, which means that people can end up needing somewhere good quality to live that gives them real choice about how they live their lives, as well as just having a roof over their heads. And I think that goes in many places across Europe, and we're seeing that. I know that other big providers such as Greystar are finding that as well.
Yeah, great. Hey, thanks so much, Patty. Last but not least, keep some coins for student accommodation sector. Patty will explain why. Patty, over to you.
Thanks very much, Neil. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to probably just whiz through this, and I'm sort of in between everyone else. So I've got one slide as opposed to lots or none. I guess when it comes to student accommodation, I mean, if we're talking about 100 million to spend, I think for me, it fits into 2 buckets. You can either have the core bucket of capital, or you've got the value add bucket of capital. And the student accommodation sector has really kind of evolved now to be, into that core space. The fundamentals really of the sector are, it is non-cyclical. It's not correlated to wider economic movements. I think we've seen that over the years. And if you go back and look at a lot of US REIT data, you'll see that the performance data of a lot of the US student accommodation operators it's just boring. It just kind of ticks up. It's not very sexy at all. It's pretty dull. And people have kind of used it as essentially as a proxy for inflation. So it's quite a defensive sort of asset class from a core perspective. You're also buying, urban real estate. You'd hope that your real estate has quite high alternative use values as well. And I think today in much bigger institutional portfolios, student accommodation offers a kind of less lumpy cash flow compared to normal the traditional commercial real estate sectors. So you can manage your cash flows a lot better. They're a lot more transparent. When it comes to the value add sector, I think this is a real emerging sort of sector within student accommodation, as we're looking at, I guess, some of the repurposing of and repositioning of first and second generation assets, which were probably developed in the early 2000s, sort of pre-GFC. And a number of these assets are probably under capexed. And actually, you could probably buy them today at sub the replacement costs. So they offer quite a lot of, I suppose, opportunity for that repositioning. And often these first generation assets are in quite core locations, so on the doors of the university campuses. But the actual accommodation itself is probably economically obsolete. So it needs work. And I think we're seeing the evolution of that sector, especially COVID has kind of accelerated some of those issues. And really, what it is somebody can get in there and manage the core. They can invest in it, stabilize it, and turn it back into a core investment. What's really interesting about that sector as well is that, you can embrace the new models. So whether it's embracing ESG, technology, the ideas around community, all of those kind of things, everything we talked about earlier, and Joe was mentioning in the co-living space, I think is applicable to this. And there's real opportunities you don't necessarily have to develop it, you can reposition existing assets to kind of embrace those new models. I think if I look at a kind of traffic light of the student sector, I think there's more green lights than there are red or amber at the moment. We've seen the demand is robust. Students overwhelmingly want to be at university. I think Unite did a survey last month which showed that 85% of their students surveyed want to be at university, even if there is a lockdown, and they don't want to be at home with mum and dad. I think it was something like 87% of them said that actually being at university is positive for their mental health. So, there is a real, the students really do value the independent living experience and the university experience. And I think the universities as well are wanting to make sure that they are keeping they're not moving to a completely virtual world, and I guess diluting the quality of the education. Probably the red light at the moment for us is a drop in demand from EU students as a result of Brexit. Something that the industry will have to focus on. And I guess the amber light is the international student piece, so the restriction of movement across borders, and that really is circumstantial rather than structural. So I think as we have the roadmap out of things, we should see a sort of tick up in September as students sort of plan ahead, especially international students. A number of them now saying that if they have to isolate for 2 weeks coming into September, they'll get on with it and they'll do it. So I think there's two different buckets you can go into in this space. If you've got 100 million, and they're both well catered for.
Great. Patty, quick question for you. How large is the UK student market in terms of the number of beds approximately?
It is, from a private bed perspective, you're looking just north of around about 600,000 private beds, but then you've got the same amount also in sort of university ownership as well.
So it's a large existing market today where the demand keeps on growing, it sounds like. Yeah,
growing and evolving.
Great. Fantastic. Okay, so it is now time to vote. Everyone's got 100 million. Unfortunately, you cannot share your contribution across multiple different asset classes. It's, I guess if I was a betting man, I kind of distribute it across, but now's your opportunity to choose one of these fantastic sectors, and look forward to seeing the result. As we wait for that, it's don't forget some of the other sessions that we have over the next 2 days. And so both later today as well as on Wednesday and Thursday. And then last but not least, encourage anyone who would like to continue to sponsor and participate in these events with the Urban Living Festival team, that there's a number of opportunities to participate, and do reach out to Katie, who will tell you a little bit more. Now, let's see whether we have any results in from our survey. Aha. So, overwhelmingly, I want to say, Honor, you convinced everyone that retirement living was 32% of the 100 million, so that's quite a lot goes there. Second was Ben with serviced apartments and extended stay. And then a tie for at 14% was hybrid accommodation and build to rent. Then came co-living, and then pretty equally hotels and student housing. I think so. This is kind of fantastic to see everyone's opinions. What really amazes me in terms of, if we think about all of these are different forms of residential accommodation, and I always think of it as that if I were to invest, I would look at student accommodation. It then goes to young professionals, and then whether that's micro living as well as then co-living, et cetera. And then you have the entire hospitality component, and then obviously senior living. So hopefully this has created some questions and some opportunities for everyone to not only listen, but actually invest. And I wanted to thank all the panelists and their excellent presentations today, and the time that's taken to prep. So thanks very much for everyone's time. Hope you have a great day. Thanks, everyone.